Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about some really real-world examples and performance around VSAM to Postgres with some particular partners and clients that we've been focusing on. And today I have Marc Sokol, our Executive Chairman of VirtualZ Computing. Marc is the original author of Realia COBOL, which was sold to CA in the 80s, right? Or is it early 90s?
91.
91. And then Marc ascended to become the Chief Marketing Officer of Computer Associates, or CA Technologies, now Broadcom, before moving into venture capital, leading investments on technology firms. I'm Dustin Froyum. I'm one of the co-founders of VirtualZ, and excited to have you with us today. And thanks for joining me, Marc.
Thank you, Dusty.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what this really means. When you're looking at these modernization projects around mainframe, there's a lot of focus on the code and getting the code updated, modernized, ported, refactored, whatever the methodology that's being kind of approached for the code piece of it. And oftentimes the data aspects can be very troublesome or even kind of delayed in looking at how you're going to deal with those. And so that's really where we focus at VirtualZ, is how do you integrate your mainframe data to other platforms, share it, modernize it, or just access it in a more easy no-code fashion. And so what we do is we have some really innovative products. One of those things is really eliminating the need for a lot of really complex CDC architectures and simplifying how you get that data. And we'll talk a lot about the performance advantages that we have in our model as well. We get past some of those data movements becoming bottlenecks and troublesome in your migration paths. I know, Marc, you've seen a lot of those in your days too, in some of these modernization projects. And any anecdotes you want to kind of introduce us to in these migration stories that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that probably the most common story is that customer sees what they view as a sort of a simple migration of one particular application to the cloud. And after they do what they believed is the simple migration of some sort of very flat file, they realize that there are many, many cases in which other data is necessary, or that the cloud data becomes stale and needs updating. And suddenly what they think is sort of low-hanging fruit turns out to be a real tough problem. And they end up having to build all of this infrastructure to simply help them move this application. And that's when really things slow down. And that's when a lot of the failures start in these migration projects.
Yeah, and the other things that we've been hearing about is that one, they have a lot of backlog of data that they need to get ported over to maintain their timelines around their overall migration project, if that's what they're doing, or just intraday type stuff too, right? Within batch windows, even in online windows, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into the capabilities of Propels in this case. And the other thing is that when they're doing that final cutover, right, time becomes extremely important in that final cutover as well. And so how do you get your current production data moved within your migration window? And so that's a big challenge that we've continued to hear from customers. And that's why they've really adopted our solutions, because of the performance and being able to meet those migration windows. All right, let's talk a little bit about the architecture before we get into some more specific details about some of the projects. Marc, you want to talk us a little bit through the overall architecture and functionality, particularly of Propels here?
Sure. So as you can see on the left, is your ZOS system with your mainframe data, VSAM files, sequential files, could be DB2 files, but that's where your corporate repository of data is. And on the right side are the targets. We're talking today about Postgres being the main target, and this Postgres can reside in a cloud database. It can be in AWS. It could be in Azure. It could be in Google Cloud. And our product provides this JDBC driven delivery. And it does it in a way that allows the data that resides on ZOS to be read natively, to be transformed, and then to be pushed to those targets on the right. You know, and we do it without any sort of custom scripting. You don't have to write any sort of code that tells the system where fields are and what formats the fields are. There's no custom ETL development necessary. It uses JDBC, an open standard, to access the data. And, you know, it's a very repeatable model, and one that works well within the systems integrator frameworks that we've been working with.
Yeah, and basically we can take any input. It's a very open architecture, so we can take any input and go to any output. Again, there's some out of the box things that we ship with this, but really it's a very, very flexible solution. I'd also mention kind of in the middle pipe there is that we have a proprietary transformation engine, and so there's a lot of automation and a lot of capability in that transformation engine. So you know, getting it from EPSIDIC and other mainframe formats and into you know, your distributed and cloud friendly formats, ASCII, and you know, we have people that want us to output into just JSON files or stuff like that. So really, really powerful. The other thing I've just mentioned about the architecture, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the efficiency and savings capabilities of this, is the mainframe portion of Propels does run on zip engines. So that's a really important aspect, and things that our customers really like about Propels as well. I think, Mark, you just want to mention just kind of the multi-platform aspects of Propels as well.
Yeah. So we have two versions of Propels. We have a version that runs natively in ZOS, and as Dusty mentions, is zip eligible. But we also have a version that runs on any Linux platform. It can, of course, read data from ZOS, or it could read data from other platforms using JDBC. And so if some of your data, let's say, resides in ZOS and you use the ZOS native version, you get the highest performing ZOS that app access. But if you have data that's sitting on other platforms and you still want to get the benefit of the transformation and the ability to push to those targets on the right, we have a Linux version as well. And both function equivalently, have the same features. It's just that the ZOS version is really tuned to operate and access ZOS data as the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, and we are seeing growing adoption in the Linux version for particularly some cloud and SaaS providers and needing to integrate their mainframe data. So that's a great capability that's come online here as well. Just another aspect of the functionality that our customers really like is that you can run certain today out of the box. You can run Propels in a basically synchronous mode, particularly around console messages and SMF data to stuff like Splunk, or if you know there's an integration with Splunk, but we can do that to other observability platforms as well. But some of the other, like the VSAM data and those types of things, you know, you don't have to do a full batch update within your either your batch window or your online window. Let's say you just wanted to do an update once a week. What we can do is also just incrementally update the data that has changed over time or at a particular point, and bring that into, you know, your target environment, whether that's a you want to do that every 5 or 10 minutes in your online window to um, a Postgres database that's feeding your data lake or some of your other AI BI platforms, which is a really, really powerful thing to be able to do without having to implement really complex CDC architectures to do that. And so, it doesn't disrupt your online window, your production data. It just incrementally pulls from our direct access architecture and brings that into that platform. So that's a very, very simplified thing that customers can do in their environment, but still keeping their data current. Mark, anything else you wanted to offer on kind of our incremental capabilities here as well?
Well, typically these environments, they, let's say they're moving 100 million records from VSAM to Postgres. And that's sort of the first batch run, if you will, transformation and batch run. But daily, less than 1% of those records are changed. We recognize and only move the data that's changed, and can identify on a record by record basis whether that record's already been moved or not. And so the subsequent updates to that Postgres target are dramatically less time consuming than the original one. And in many cases, that gives a benefit that far exceeds change data capture with nowhere near the complexity.
Yeah, and the complexity, the cost, the change data capture from just a resource standpoint, set aside the software that's enabling that, just the resource capabilities to do the change data capture tends to be very, very robust. And so, and what we've continued to hear from our customer base and our partners is that because we can do near real time, like you could schedule Propels every second, or even um, you could just put it into your overall JCL in that this happens and then Propels makes the update, so you can just put that in your JCL. That you can do that asynchronously, every second, every 5 seconds, every hour, a couple times a day, whatever you want and is the need of that data set. And that is adequate for most customers. And so we've continued to hear about the simplification that this offers, and it really meets their needs. And they've experienced a lot of, I don't know, over architecting some of these solutions. And we had one customer that they tried to implement a CDC solution for 2 years and finally gave up. Just it wouldn't function. It was too much resource, too complex, and so they went with using a asynchronous model, but on a near real time because of the scheduling, and we're able to implement that in a very, very short amount of time. And so that's a big win for that customer. All right, so let's talk a little bit about performance. Mark, you want to kick us off, and I'll add a couple anecdotes about these particular tests that are pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the first questions that comes to us from customers and prospects when we give them a sense of what this Propel's product can do in moving data, and they're always questioning, what's the performance going to be on my particular machine? Am I going to be able to handle the job within the window that I've created for this? And truthfully, there's a lot of skepticism from these prospects, and we're now able to really show proof. And Dusty, why don't you walk us through some of these details?
Yeah, and I'll even Mark, you're kind of mentioning our progress is that, we were seeing really incredible benchmarks in our testing as we were first bringing the product out. And it's been really fun to see that implemented. And what we suspected is that would scale pretty pretty far when you're putting it on, large enterprise mainframes, and that's been validated. And some of these are actually, even though these numbers are very large, they're even fairly limited in some test environments or even kind of restricted production environments to do these tests. And the numbers have just been pretty remarkable. So the first one is a partner for a customer. And so they're undergoing a migration. And so again, one of the issues that they have is that they need to move a lot of historical data over. And then when they do their final cutover, they have to make sure that they get their production data over within that migration window. And so the performance is extremely important. And they came to us. They didn't really have a solution. And again, it had been something that had been a little bit overlooked in how they were actually going to do the final cutover. And so, we kind of, with our partner, met that challenge. And so the testing has just been pretty remarkable. And we'll talk a little bit about the production testing as well. So they're seeing, we were seeing, 6 to 20,000 records per second in some of our testing, fairly large VSAM records, about 1,000 or a 1K record. But they've even exceeded that, in that they're seeing 56,000 records in this first case. And again, these are not small records as well. Per second throughput, you see the total file there's 460,000 records in 25 seconds. There's some initiation. What we actually see is the initiation to their cloud environment actually takes longer than the data movement itself. And so it's pretty fun. One of the tests that they did in the beginning of this project was the engineer came to kind of our partner that we interact with and just said, "Hey, I ran this test. It didn't even work. It didn't even execute." And our partner said, "Well, did you actually go and look and see if the data was there?" And sure enough, it had executed so quickly, he didn't even think it had ran. So this particular test was, I think it was about 25,000 records in 1 second. And so the whole job completed in 1 second. And so he didn't even think it had occurred. This next test was actually a production test. So full production data to their target environment. And they actually had to shut the test off after 18 minutes because they didn't expect so much data so quickly that the cloud environment kind of filled up. And so they were seeing, yeah, 60 million records in that window there. Again, sustained at about 56,000 records per second, or 3.38 million per minute. So just remarkable numbers that we're seeing in the performance. And again, this was still even restricted. So once they kind of turn it on for the full production migration, we expect this to even go up further. Yeah, Mark, I don't know if I've ever seen kind of data movement numbers like this in the
Yeah,
market.
it's, I mean, especially the fact that it's going to the cloud. I mean, you sometimes, this is, I mean, we're talking here about Postgres in the cloud, but
Yep.
you can imagine there could even be an on-premise solution, an on-premise Postgres solution which would run even faster than this. So it's super, it's very compelling for data movement in any form.
Yeah, that the network really becomes the limiting factor in a lot of these, is that, the cloud can't accept the data fast enough that we can produce it out of the mainframe. And that's one of the other secrets about the performance that we have, is that it's really a direct access model, and that's what allows us to do the incremental. And so, a lot of the historical ETL, ELT models is, you're extracting the data, you're staging the data, you're transforming the data, and we're taking 2 to 3 steps out of that process, and then a direct right to the database as well.
And
So
we're doing it on a zip engine on ZOS in
yeah,
general. So you're not paying you're not paying for those MIPS like if they were on the general CPU.
Yeah. So this customer is extremely pleased. And we've had a long relationship with them, and I know they're excited for what we're going to help them do in this as they come to close up this project. You want to talk a little bit about the scalability, Mark, and just what we can do across sysplexes or multiple LPARs or multiple versions of Propels? Anything you want to kind of share here?
Well, we're a proper application running in ZOS. You can run us in parallel. You can run us in serial. You can choose to, take pieces of the data and run them in parallel. You can you can have run 10 versions of Propels running against 10 separate aspects of the data. So you can parallelize the solution to get even higher performance. There's certainly many ways to tune Propels going forward. I think especially, so many systems integrators projects are stalled at this stage. And we really feel as though Propels eliminates that stall. It allows you to get the data to the target quicker, gives you a much more straightforward pricing model for how you're going to resource this, and in general is a much more predictable outcome for you as a systems integrator.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And just the scalability piece of this is really important, especially to that customer that we just talked to. They were still running single threaded, but their intent in when they do the cutover, particularly of a lot of their historical data, but also the production data is they'll run multiple copies of Propels, and that'll help them go even faster. So the scalability is extremely important. I'll talk a little bit more about the commercial terms here in towards the end, and just what that means and how that doesn't really impact. You can really run the architecture that you need to accomplish what you need. We can handle a lot of different use cases, and we get thrown a lot of those. And there's a number of webinars that you can kind of explore, and materials that tell you about all these use cases. But let's just talk a little bit about VSAM to Postgres in particular. So VSAM is a very big sweet spot. We're very focused on that because that can be a big problem for customers to deal with. And again, because of our architecture and how we approach the access to VSAM, gives us a real advantage in using Propels for these projects. Also, Postgres, we ship a pre-configured commercial highly performing driver for Postgres. And again, that's part of why you see some of these numbers as well, as that particular driver that we ship with configuration files. So it's very plug and play in that regard. Mark, you want to talk a little bit about our SI-led model and
yeah,
how we
we're
work
a
with our partners?
Yeah, we from when we founded VirtualZ, we knew that the technology that we provided, although it provides a direct value to enterprise customers, it's really only part of a continuing modernization strategy, and those strategies are mostly led by systems integrators. We have clients that have 2 or 3 different systems integrators involved in some of these projects. Many of these projects are 8 and 9 figures each. And so we've spent the last 5 years building up relationships with SIs so that not only are they comfortable implementing our software, but they recognize where our software can make their customers more productive and can reduce the total amount of time for these migrations, and really increase the likelihood that the total migration is going to succeed, as opposed to being stuck at one of these particularly thorny data access problems.
Yeah. I'll just mention we've talked a lot about uh, CDC here, and so what we will talk about a little bit more in next couple slides is just the installation and setup experience. The ideal customer here, you're looking at a 6 to 12 month timeline. Um, Again, we'll talk a little bit about the installation, but I'll just share this one customer started their test in late January, I believe. And, we're here in mid-March, and they've done, a lot of validation in that time, and including these very big kind of stress tests of Propels. And so, and they have a very, very aggressive migration timeline. So, we look for that 6 to 12 month lead time. We can help you, and our partners can help you accelerate if you really need to do that. But again, that's more of the ideal customer. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the capabilities we have to support you in your migrations here as well. Um, so this is, we have a POC model that we structure very carefully. And again, this is what this particular, this customer with the performance data that we're referencing followed largely as well. So you can kind of see this timeline, and, we really focus that on a 4 week window. Part of what makes that possible is that the software installs in, minutes, hours, configuration within hours, and maybe a day or two, not weeks and months or years. And so that allows you to move forward very quickly. And Mark, I don't, you have, from kind of a more technical aspect, what really stands out to you about Propels being installed and set up versus some of these other some of the other products or historical models of ETL and ELT?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very simple setup. It's a very simple install. Typically with Propels, you identify the source, you identify the target, you identify the transformations, and those transformations can be driven typically are driven by the COBOL record layout of the data that you're reading. And so there's a very limited amount of inputs to this process. And then it's just a matter of making sure that as a customer, you give it the proper access to the target and to the source. And then you probably run a test load, see how that performs, see if the transformations are correct, and then run some, close to production load to make sure that the performance fits within your window. Some customers do separate tests of different data to see how the incremental mode performs and the benefit that it provides. But we're not talking about a very complicated proof of concept. It's actually a very simple one. And we've had customers within a week come back to us and say that we've effectively completed the POC. There's some more administrative work and paperwork kind of stuff to move forward, but the actual testing of the product doesn't take very long, and it sort of points to the simplicity of this product and how it's installed and how it's run.
Yeah, and you'll see really the bulk of this is in week 2, and what we, particularly with our experienced partners too, SIs that are leading some of these projects, they're already they're installed and they're starting to test in week 1, really in all cases. And then, yeah, really week 4 tends to be the readout piece of it. So it's a pretty efficient process. The one thing that I would mention is if you needed us to um, do a specific driver or input or output, that may add to this. And that's part of the POC testing. And so just take that into account. Our POCs are if it's a standard POC SI led, there's no cost to that, so there's no charge. If you do need a specific driver, there's small charges to that, or if you need our particular engineering resources, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But overall, a very, very structured and efficient process. Yeah, and we just talked a little bit about this, so I won't belabor that. And then, kind of overall, this is what you need to focus on, right? Identifying that data set, schedule your technical workshop, and then launch that structured POC. Mark, I was just going to mention one other thing about, if they do have the COBOL copybook, right? The transformation is, because of our transformation engine, can be very, very highly automated. Now that can be adjusted through our config files, but overall, we can implement a high degree of automation particularly from VSAM, obviously with that COBOL copybook. So that's a really powerful feature. I'll talk a little bit about the commercial model here. So we charge just a flat yearly fee. So when Mark was talking about, the architecture and running it in parallel and, across your sysplex, across many LPARs, across many data sets, that doesn't cost you any more for us. And so we don't charge by the data or the installation. It's just really an enterprise fee. And that covers really all of your implementations. Now there can be some, you get to select one JDBC driver. What we found is that most customers have a one particular target, but if there's some additional capabilities or targets, there's a small uplift on some of those as well. But again, it's if you look at the market, we're significantly less than what we understand our competitive pricing to be, and so that's another advantage to the customers. I mentioned no consumption metering or anything like that. So if you're licensed for your enterprise for the year and, for those components, you run full wide open and just do what you need to do. We do offer multi-year options, and so we can configure that for you as well. And so we do see that in some of our deals, 2 to 3, depending on what they're doing. But the other thing we find out, right, Mark, is that they like it so much that they come up with other use
Yeah,
cases and solutions, and so they tend to expand the usage because of the power of Propels. And then if you're a partner, we're very transparent in our pricing, the street price, but um, we do offer SI margin, and so that doesn't affect the street price to the customer. So what the street price is, obviously we can't dictate what our partner charges, but generally that's what they're shooting for is they work with us to make sure that street price, so we're not playing games with discounting or exorbitant list prices. We want to be really transparent, and I think that's really different in this mainframe world, right? Mark, you and I have operated in this world, me as a customer and you as the vendor. And so we've kind of seen it all. And, transparency has been one of the challenges for sure to the customer base about, what to expect. And you see wild variations in the deal size and structure.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's something unique. I just mentioned that was kind of our program for today, but we have a ton of resources. So we have blog topics on use cases, just the products, just a ton of resources, and you can sort by product or you can search it by particular use cases. We have demos on demand for each one of these each one of our products, which includes Propels, Flows, um, Lozen. Geez, we got so many products now I can barely remember them. Propels, Flows, Zach, and Lozen. And so you can check each of those out and what the different capabilities are across those. Um, Jeannie, our CEO, will be at Google Next here in April. And so if you'd love to meet with her and get some time and learn more about this, please reach out to us. You can check that out on the events page and set up a meeting with Jeannie. And then we this webinar will be published on our YouTube channel as well as our website, but also we convert these into on our podcast channel as well, called Skyward Data. And so all of our webinars are available on audio only there as well. And there's been some great guests. Mark, I know you've participated in some of those in the past.
Oh, yeah,
So we have some
absolutely.
really interesting people from the mainframe industry. So check those out as well. All right, Mark, anything else you want to, any parting
No,
thoughts or
I think
words?
we're very excited about the uptake in usage of Propels, the fact that these enterprises are recognizing that they can get past what has typically been one of the biggest impediments to modernization of their enterprise, and excited to have you as our prospects take a look and try a proof of concept.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining me, Mark. And yeah, just go out to our website, virtualzcomputing.com, or email us at hello@virtualzcomputing.com if you need more information or you want to try our products or just want to talk about the mainframe world. We love it. So, all right. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Excellent. Bye now.